Speaker.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Take a call on behalf of New Zealand First and the Taxation Annual Rates Returns Filing and Remedial Matters Bill. And it is very interesting, Mr Speaker, that I'm giving this speech while the Olympics are on, because much of what we've heard from the national benches could be aligned to some of the Olympics in the last week. In particular, I have seen at the Olympics a number of own goals at the Olympics. And we have here in this chamber today basically an admission that the government has made a number of own goals. It's almost like also watching the rearranging of the deck chairs on the Titanic, because while they talk about tinkering, they are quite correct that there's a lot of tinkering going on around the edges in relation to some of these taxation changes, rather than addressing the big picture of proper tax reforms. And in respect to this, you do wonder, Mr Speaker, that had this government not provided those tax reductions for the wealthy a couple of years ago, had not knocked $1 billion or $2 billion off the taxes of the wealthy, would they be needing to rearrange the deck chairs of the Titanic today to come up with some of these sort of nickel and dime margins of error amounts of taxes on the edges, rather than actually keeping those $1 billion or $2 billion from a year or two ago, which would have been in the coffers today? We would have probably been $4 or $5 billion better off today, 2 years later, rather than giving all the mates of this government, mainly the mates of this government, some significant tax deductions. And in that respect, and I had to smile when I heard the previous speaker talking about lurching all over the place. Well, if it's not lurching all over the place to reduce KiwiSaver from the employer contribution from 4% to 2% a couple of years ago, or last year was it, and then bring it back up this year to 3%, if that's not lurching all over the place, I don't know what is. But it almost feels like many of these government people have actually been sitting in a chair on the Titanic while it's going down, because they've had to hold on very firmly and watch KiwiSaver start at 4%, go down to 2%, and now go up to 3%. And people out there in KiwiSaver land in New Zealand, and New Zealanders who genuinely want to have a good savings scheme, must be wondering what is going on with this government, who can basically play around with such an important scheme year by year and basically put a huge cloud and a huge doubt over the long-term intentions of this government in terms of KiwiSaver. So that's another own goal. That's the second own goal for the day. And the third own goal is coming up, because it says here that this will allow the capital costs of unsuccessful software development to be tax deductible. Now, I wondered whether .com was involved in this. I wondered whether John Beggs was involved with this as well, because to allow the capital cost of unsuccessful software development to be tax deductible clearly means that people in the software business who haven't been that successful, and there's one or two in Coatesville, there's one or two that live out at the .com mansion who in recent times under this government have not been that successful. They are probably hoping that this will go through, and because they will be able to deduct it. And hopefully they will be thankful to this government for those unsuccessful software developments that are now will be tax deductible, because they won't have to then put them in brown envelopes and maybe give them over the desks or over the board tables or over the dinner tables in a Coatesville mansion, because they'll know in the future it'll be tax deductible and they'll be able to do it quite above board, because they know that their unsuccessful software development will be all right. So that's another own goal. That's three own goals. So it's 3-0. It's 3-0 to the opposition at the moment. 3-0 to the opposition. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Because the next own goal says that the taxes on bonus shares issued by companies. Well, holy mackerel. Have we not got bonus shares on state-owned assets coming up shortly for the power companies? And so those are going to be also part of this scheme, that taxes on bonus shares issued by companies are going to be part of this review. Why would that be? Isn't that convenient that when you're selling off all the shares in your power companies that you own, that I own, yes, that you own, that he owns, that she owns, that we all currently own, that in the future the taxes on bonus shares given out by companies is going to be part of it. So this is a grand scheme. This is the fourth own goal. So we're up to 4-0 to the opposition now. This is incredible. It's amazing. So it goes on and on, Mr. Speaker, that basically there's this tinkering around the edges, this playing around with all the margins of error in the taxation system, basically is an excuse for this government over the last couple of years, 4 years, coming up 4 years now, of making major changes, major reductions in tax for their mates, for their business friends, for their wealthy friends on Paratai Drive who are building $30 million mansions or buying luxury launches on Auckland Harbour, helping them out, giving them taxation, giving the likes of the former CEO of Telecom, who was earning $5 million a year, another $5,000 a week in savings and tax, giving the Prime Minister, John Key, another $1,000 a week in his back pocket so that he would be better off, so he could invest in another house in Hawaii maybe, or more shares in the Colorado ski fields, or more investments in Bankers Trust in the United States, wherever else is $50 million is around the world, so he can do that. But, Mr. Speaker, basically a lot of this bill is just tinkering around the edges but not addressing the big picture of proper tax reform. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First has said in the previous bill that we will support any policy that does try to tighten up in terms of taxation and banking issues. We are going to support this bill because there are some merits in it. And the fact that it is bringing KiwiSaver back up to 3% is a good move. It should never have gone down to 2% in the first place. And the fact that it is starting to weed out taxpayers who have not necessarily filed returns when they should have. And again, probably most of those will be their wealthy mates on the other side of the house who haven't done that because the average Kiwis, most of which don't get much in the way of a tax refund. Most of them don't. So it doesn't really apply to paper boys in particular. Paper boys, how many tax deductions or refunds will paper boys get in the next year? Not many. But the government did fine $14 million from the paper boys and the paper girls of this country a few months ago in the budget. So they'll be one of the ones affected in terms of the tinkering around the edges of the taxes. But, Mr. Speaker, we will support this continuing through. Taxation is an important matter in this country. It is important for all 4.5 million New Zealanders who depend on all the services that this country provides and the services that the state does provide to have an efficient and effective taxation system. Some of the provisions in this bill does allow for improvements in that area, and therefore New Zealand First will support this bill.
Mr. Speaker.
John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, I sense that last speech in the House was delivered by somebody who aspires to be Deputy Leader of New Zealand First. But when I hear people using constantly phrases like shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic, tinkering around the edges, own goals, these are just euphemisms because the Speaker doesn't understand the bill against which they're talking. And it's unfortunate that the member was not involved on the Select Committee, at least to my knowledge, and so unlike his actual leader, he's not as well versed, so he hides his lack of understanding in these glib cliches. Mr. Speaker, I feel it a little bit important to explain something to that member of the issues around taxation. Now, you see, if you have a perfect market, think of it like a supercomputer network. It's got sensors in every part of the economy, and they reach into brains, even small brains, and they read our desires. And so constantly the market is re-optimising production and allocating resources perfectly. But efficiency is not enough to ensure a fair society. If Bill Gates has got all the money and the rest of us then starve, so we need to do something to improve efficiency of our economy. So, Mr. Williams, we have things called taxes. They're inefficient, but we need the money to spend on things like health, on police, on schools, on roads. But taxes are inefficient because the market price no longer equals cost, and cost no longer equals value. So the government faces a dilemma. We want to avoid inefficiency because we pass up the chance to make someone better off at no cost to anybody else. And most of us want to use taxes to move income from rich to poor. So this bill is the government's. In this bill, the government needs to make the economy, and attempts to make it, and underlying this bill is a drive to make the economy both efficient and fair. Now, under a Labour government, supported by New Zealand First and the Green Party, I think New Zealand would have, first of all, a capital gains tax. You promised that in the last election, on all businesses and farms, and that would penalise our productive industry. That would add to inefficiency. We would see more than a doubling of employer KiwiSaver costs, Mr Williams. And we would see a big gap between the company rate and the top personal rate that encourages tax avoidance. So we've been through this bill in a first reading, and the changes between the first reading and the second reading can be summarised like this. The changes in this bill are in addition to the biggest tax reforms in the last 25 years, which are helping families get ahead. They're boosting growth to create jobs and to lift incomes. And they're encouraging savings and investment, and they're making the tax rules fairer for all New Zealanders. We've moved from a situation we inherited from the last Labour government, where people were spending $1.11 for every dollar they earned, to the position that we're now spending only 98 cents for every dollar that we earn. We have built a more competitive tax system that's tilting the economy away from borrowing and spending, which is what the Labour government would do if they'd come back. They would borrow and spend. We're tilting away from that towards savings and investment. I know, Mr Cosgrove, that you blithely got rid of $7 billion as Deputy Minister of Finance, $7 billion, but we're trying to move this economy towards savings and investment. This bill will produce a simpler and a fairer tax system that rewards hard work and protects the vulnerable. Across-the-board tax cuts, instituted by this government already, are rewarding hard work, and they're delivering more money to New Zealanders, to every New Zealander, whether you're working or you're retired, Mr Williams. 2/3 of the cost of the income tax cuts went into reducing the bottom two tax rates. About 3/4 of earners, as Paul Goldsmith said, are paying no more than 17.5% personal income tax. We cut the company tax by 28%, ensuring New Zealand businesses remain competitive. And a family with 2 children, Mr Williams, can earn up to $50,000 a year and effectively pay no tax. No tax when working for families is taken into account. After-tax wages are increasing faster than prices under this government, and we've taken steps to tighten up property tax rules by eliminating depreciation, removing the LAQC rules, and improving working for family integrity measures. Now, since the second reading, this bill has been revised a little bit since last September. The 2 main income tax forms for individuals, the IR3, the personal tax summary, and the personal tax summary, will no longer be amalgamated. Instead, existing practice will continue, because the initiative would have put a lot of pressure on officials from IRD and their ability to undertake further systems changes. The bill has been changed to contain a proposal to require individuals who choose to file for a particular year to also file for the previous 4 years. The application date for this proposal is to be deferred from 2014-15 income year to 2016-17. However, the implementation date will be set earlier by order, or can be set earlier by order in council. The bill also clarifies that the 4-year rule applies from the most recently ended tax year rather than from the year for which the individual chooses to file. I know this is difficult for you, Mr Cosgrove, but then that is the lot of a list MP who has no constituents to look after. Tax debts from the previous years under the 4-year rule will not incur the use of money, interest or penalties from the previous due date. A new due date will apply instead. Credits and debits arising from the 4-year rule will be used to offset each other, Mr Cosgrove. There's other changes. I'm not reading the bill. I'm describing the changes that were introduced from the last draft of the bill to this one. The application date and savings provision for the proposal to charge GST on late payment fees is going to be deferred from April 2012 to January 2013. I know you didn't understand that, Mr Williams, but GST also will not be charged on late payment fees if the underlying supply is exempt. Mr Speaker, other changes to the GST provisions have also been made, such as clarifying the definition of land and where new apportionment fees for zero rating supplies can be used. Finally, Mr Speaker, the Foreign Investor Tax Credit Scheme will be expanded to investors in foreign investment portfolio investment entities, or PIEs, with the application from 2013 and 2014 income year. Mr Speaker, this is an excellent bill. The government has listened to submission through the Select Commission process. The bill has been improved, and I have no difficulty whatever in commending its passing to the House. Thank you.
Honourable Clayton.